Hi, I'm Bobby Kimbrough here with Off the Cuffs. I'm very excited today that we have my partner in crime prevention, my friend, Chief Catrina Thompson. So I want to welcome you to Off the Cuffs today. I was very excited when you agreed to come and sit and chat with us. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
So, I was so excited about having you here because there's so many questions that while I know you, I've known you for, I ain't going to date myself. You and your husband. You and your husband and I went to rookie school together.
That's right.
With the police department. So I've known you and your family for 30 plus years at least. And so there are a lot of questions that the people would like to know answers. And so what I thought I'd do was how we began this conversation is I just want you to share with us. I know you from Detroit. Most people don't. They probably think you were born and raised right here in Winston-Salem. How did you end up as the chief of the fourth largest city and the fourth largest county in the state of North Carolina? I remember when you were a line officer, an officer in a patrol car, when you were in CID, criminal investigation, and now you have matriculated to the chief of a department of about 700 plus men and women, and what a great job they do in the city of Winston-Salem in North Carolina. I just want you to share with us about you and how did you arrive here?
So, Sheriff, as you know, I was born and raised in the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. I am the oldest girl of four,
wow.
All girls, and my mother and father divorced, ultimately divorced when I was 10. So my mother, for the most part, had been a single mom since I was 10 years old. Fortunately, she had the support and love of her parents. So my sisters and I were pretty much raised by my mother and my maternal grandmother and grandfather.
Wow.
And I'll say, I have to say, I can't say enough about my grandparents. Many people may have heard me tell the story. Both were from Alabama. My grandmother was the youngest of four girls, and both my grandparents had vision. They did not have an education. My grandfather
wow.
had to come out of school at the age of, in third grade. And so, of course, I was a teenager when I learned that my grandfather couldn't read or write. It was very painful. But then I understood, as I started to get older, it was the times that he was living in. So
right.
he had to come out of school and quite frankly, had to start working in the cotton fields to help his family. So my grandmother and grandfather both got married young when they
mm-hmm.
were teenagers. My grandfather went off to the war. And when he came back from World War II, he did some working in the coal mine, and then they literally started making their way to Detroit, Michigan, by way of Portland, Oregon, if you could imagine that.
Detroit, the Motor City.
That's it. And so my grandfather would ultimately obtain a job with Chrysler, and he worked there for 30 years. And so, again, you're talking about a man who couldn't read or write, but was able to do well in one of the largest industries in the nation at the time, and definitely in that city.
So what drove you to law enforcement, in a male predominantly profession? Not only are you thriving in it, but when I see women in law enforcement, it's a great thing because they're needed. But when I see African-American women come into law enforcement, I know from being an African American male, I see a different vantage point. What drove you, or what made you want to go into law enforcement? We all have our own stories. Mine was something different than yours and vice versa. But what drove you to the point, or did you know you wanted to be a police officer?
No, I wasn't that kid.
No?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I wish I had been. The road would have been a whole lot easier for me. But no, I actually thought that engineering was what I wanted to do. And so
wow.
I really stumbled into law enforcement, and I credit my sister Monica with helping me find kind of my passion, and that is Monica's 11 months younger than I am, and so she started. I'd started college. My first year in college, I did 1 semester at Mercy College of Detroit, and then I did another semester, the second semester, at Howard University. Before I realized I wanted to be back home. So I went back and I finished up at Wayne State. But once I got to Wayne State, I'm in my second year. Monica is starting college, and Monica is one of those who always knew she wanted to be in journalism. So, and that's what she's doing today.
Wow.
And so even in elementary school, she knew that's what she wanted to do. So when we're coming home from school, I'm in my second year of college and she's in her first year, my mother's debriefing us on our day, and Monica's all excited about what she's doing and how she's doing it. And I'm thinking, I don't know where that's coming from, but I want some of that.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized I wasn't doing what I was passionate about. The only problem is, and I want all of our young listeners to hear me on this, is I didn't know what I was passionate about. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize it was okay at the time.
Right.
I literally stumbled, and this is what I call divine intervention. I stumbled across the campus kind of wondering, and walked into the student union, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was actually giving a seminar. I stopped and listened, and everything they were saying resonated within me. And that really was the first time that I realized this is what I want to do. I'm going to give it a try. Started taking some criminal justice classes. Didn't realize, because I'm first generation college, so I had no one really guiding me much. Didn't realize you're supposed to withdraw from College of Engineering and set a new major. So in essence, I joke about, and it's true, I literally was kicked out of the School of Engineering because I started taking my own criminal justice classes, which was not a part of the engineering program.
Wow.
But anyway, I continued on with the criminal justice track, and worked at Kohl's department store as a loss prevention employee, became a supervisor, and I literally loved what I was doing so much. And I realized if I didn't push myself outside of that comfort zone, that's what I'd be doing for the rest of my life. And I knew there was more for me. So how did I end up in Winston-Salem? I hate the winters, and people say, "Well, you're from Detroit," but that's how I know I hate the winters. I can't stand cold weather, and I'm not fond of snow. And so I literally started looking for locations that I can move to where the climate was, you had the seasons, but not necessarily the harsh winters, and can still do what I was passionate in. And becoming a police officer was probably the simplest thing for me to do. The Treasury Department, that testing was closed at that time, and so I couldn't take the test for the ATF at the time. So, the thought process was get 2 or 3 years in local law enforcement and then go on to the federal government. So fortunately for me, the city of Winston-Salem was relentless. The recruiters were relentless in contacting me and reaching out to me. And, in total disclosure, it was 1993. I knew the Olympics were coming to the U.S., to Atlanta in 96. And so really, Atlanta is where I was shooting for. And again, divine intervention stepped in. And fortunately, that's it. I was able to get in on Winston-Salem. And I literally had to mail my application packet overnight in order to meet the deadline date for it to get here.
Well, we're glad you're here. So, I've heard your story many times, and I listened to it. But let me ask you a question. When you look at your life, what was a defining moment in your life when you realized, I can do better? I can do something beyond what is out here. I look at my own life, and I guess the defining moment with me was growing up in East Winston, just sitting on a picnic table and watching, and you say to yourself, I want more than this. I want more than just every day. And I think that exposure, we make our decisions based on our experience, our exposure, our intellect. But as you said, growing up as in a single household, your grandfather who had limited education. So what was that like, and how did you channel that energy? Because we have a lot of people that view this podcast that are saying, you had a crystal stair life. How did you get here? Did you have bumps? Did you have bruises? How did you overcome these obstacles to arrive at the chief? Because, you say you started in Detroit, and here you are sitting in Winston-Salem as the chief of police. Because, most people look and say it looks easy, or that was easy. but not knowing, they see the glory, but they don't know your story. And so I've heard you talk about the moments growing up in a rocky environment. How do you stay focused like that? Because there's so much happening in our world today where we have young men and women who want to do things in life, who have dreams and aspirations, who want to become the next police chief. There's a young girl sitting somewhere saying, I want to be the next Chief Thompson. There's a young man somewhere saying the same thing, but yet they don't know how to break through. They don't know how to keep the pitfalls from catching them. Because I know and you know that in law enforcement, if you have anything, certain marks on your record, it will prohibit you and keep you out of living your dream. So how do you get through those times to get here?
So, Sheriff, quite frankly, I had family members, in total honesty, my mother and grandparents, they all knew that education was the key. And so while they didn't have it, they were hardworking people and did everything that they could to provide those things to my sisters and I. And really what that meant was they realized that resources existed in our community, things that the community could provide for us that they couldn't necessarily provide. So they involved the community. I talked about my mother being the gatekeeper. They made sure that anybody who walked through the gate that had access to us were who they were supposed to be. We were always safe. And so to that end, I'll tell you this, you mentioned having trials and tribulation in my life. I'm just like everybody else. I grew up in a house prior to my mother and father divorcing. My mother was actually a victim of domestic violence by the hands of my father. Now, he never put his hands on my sisters or I, and we never saw him put his hands on my mother, but we did hear it. And so, again, there are many people who say, I grew up in a household like this, I can't rise above it. And I'm here to tell you that you can. You have to believe in yourself and a power greater than yourself, and then do the best you can. Don't worry about the rest. I think the biggest thing to understand is that nothing worthwhile comes easy. And my grandmother always said that nothing worthwhile comes easy. So you've got to work hard at it and set your goals. I'll tell you, when I started rookie school in 1994 here in Winston-Salem, I wasn't starting rookie school thinking I was going to be police chief. Not at all. What I was doing is, again, taught that whatever you do, be the best at it. I was the only female in my class. I ultimately was voted by my peers in the class as being the president of the class. And so I took on that role. I started putting together study guides and that kind of thing, and realizing that people are depending on me. And I've taken that kind of attitude throughout my career. It wasn't until after I became police captain that I realized it was possible for me to be police chief.
So let me ask you a question. You said that in the rookie school year, you were the only woman, only female. So I'm sure that a lot of times when you go places now, you're the only female in there. You're the only woman in there that has the rank of chief. So how do you adjust to being the only sometimes? How do you adjust to being a maverick? How do you adjust to when you walk in a room that is a profession that is male-dominated? How do you set your mind to say, you know what, I can sit at the table? Because there are a lot of women, there are a lot of women out here that are subjected to a lot of things when they go into a room, a lot of pressures in a male-dominant profession, a lot of A personalities, a lot of testosterone floating around in the room. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to believing in yourself and a power greater than yourself. You have to know that and believe in your own self, that you belong there just like everybody else. And, I always believe in trying to make myself stand out or be different. Mm-hmm. So if I'm the only female in the room, that was just made it easy for me.
Exactly.
The other thing about it is, I always tell my young ladies and young men that make sure you have a seat at the table. And if there's not one designated with your name on it, bring your own folding chair and scoot some people over. Be a part of it. Be involved. I have this saying, and I tell my children all the time, losers let it happen, winners make it happen. So you create opportunities for yourself. again, you have to believe in you, and then realize that you can't do it alone. Reach out to the people, surround yourself with people who are doing the things in life that you want to do. So and ask them questions.
So I got to bring us to the forward. I got to bring us to the present.
Okay.
So how long have you been the police chief now?
Just over 2 years.
2 years. Mm-hmm. It's 2019, so 2017.
September 1st of 2017.
Okay. So now, here we are. You're the chief in Winston-Salem, right? What do you see? What's happening? How do you deal with, I saw you get a look right here. How do you deal with what's happening, the pressures, all the things that are happening in this city? What's the thing that, how do we change it? How do you move forward? How do you change atmospheres? How do you change mindsets? Now that you're sitting here, all that you've come through to get here, from a officer to a corporal to a sergeant to a lieutenant to a captain to an assistant chief, now to the chief of police, not to mention all the political dynamics that take place in trying to get here, all of the work that has to take place to get here, and your mother, your wife, all these things. So as you sit as the police chief in this city, tell me, what do you see?
What do I see? I see that we have, we're in trying times right now, Sheriff. We are, and this is a nationwide issue, we're dealing with gun violence like never before. We're having to teach our kids what to do if an active shooter comes into our schools. That's the world we're living in right here in the United States.
How do we get here, though?
That's a big question. The thing that I like to focus on is what can we do in our community, and in our community, it's got to be about pushing education. I think you asked me, what do I see, and that's what caused me to give the look that I gave. Is there are things that I see that and it's extremely challenging and hurtful. You mentioned the fact that I am a mother. In addition to being a mother of 2 teenagers, one of them has autism. So again, I go back to, I'm no different than anyone else. I have the same life challenges that other people have, and it's how you choose to deal with them. But what I'll say, particularly to those who are listening or watching, is that we owe it to our children. You may have heard me tell the story growing up that my grandfather, who I always go back to, because when you talk about role models, you talk about a hero. He was all of that to me and my family, and with no education. But gone are the days where you can get a job like Chrysler or here Reynolds without having an education. So I want to make sure our young people understand. I don't want anybody going around saying, well, Chief Thompson said her grandfather couldn't read or write, and he did this, that, or the other. We're talking decades ago, and it worked for him. Today, you've got to have an education to be able to compete globally. And so with that, we got to understand we are demanding our kids come to school and be able to focus and study, but they're hungry. So if you got hunger pains and you're sitting in the classroom, it's hard to focus. What you're focusing on is, I need something to eat.
Well, let me ask you a question. So what you're saying, a lot of it I knew and some of it I didn't. So I want to have to retitle you not only as a chief, but as a superwoman. I mean, because the things that you just named that you do every day, that's very impressive. And a lot of women do that. They go to work, they come home, they maintain a house, they're a wife to a husband, and so that alone right there is a full-time job within itself. To be a homemaker, to be a wife, to be a working spouse, all of those. So, but here's what I got to ask you. So I was asking the question, how did we get here? And I always ask that question, how do we get here? You talked about how this world is so competitive. If you can't compete, you can't eat. We live in a society of what I'll call capabilities and possibilities. The more capability you have, the more possibilities. But I always ask this question because people ask me this question, how do we get here? Because if we don't address or realize how we get here, How can we move away from here? And so when you look out and you see all these issues that are taking place, how do you see us fixing it? You mentioned that we want a kid to go to school to learn to read, to write, but yet they go to school hungry, which is a whole nother problem within itself. But as a police chief, as a mother, as a parent, two teenage children, how do you sit back, not only as the police chief, not only as a mother, but as a woman, but as a human being, as a citizen of the United States and as a resident of this county and this city, how do you see us going forward? How do we fix some of the issues that we have? Because a lot of times people are asking me the question, well, we know we got problems. What are some of the solutions? Can we arrest our way out of this? No, we cannot arrest our way out of this situation, this problem that we're in. So as a leader in this community, one of the leaders in this community, we've got to start to have what I call accountability and real conversations because, as you said, from a spiritual standpoint, we have been blessed to matriculate to the places that we are. So to whom much is given, much is required. So what is the game plan and how do we change the narrative? What do we do to try to begin to change some of the things that you and I see daily?
Well, Sheriff, you've named a lot of things. I think it's important for us as community leaders, as community members, that we realize, number one, by the yard is hard, but inch by inch, anything is a cinch. So find your inch in this community and work on your inch. You work on your inch, I work on mine. We've got two inches towards our yard, right? Mm-hmm. And we gather people together and all work on our individual inch to get to that yard. And then we move and start inching our way to the next yard. You have reached out and I'm extremely impressed with the work that you're doing over to support North Hills. I think the rest of us need to find a school in our community that we can help children in that school. That becomes our inch. Mm-hmm. North Hills is your inch. And that's not saying no one else can help you and your team out at North Hills. But what I'm saying is we've got to feel an obligation to help our children, and we've got to help change the trajectory in their lives. Some children are born in areas that, because of where they're born, they're already defeated. And so, again, we've got to do our part to change that, and I'll tell you, you've heard me tell the story about my grandfather owning a small business right in my neighborhood, which was, by all accounts, a high crime area, but it was my home. And he owned a small business. And as an 8-year-old elementary school student, I was working as the cashier in his store. And, I often joke with our students, our kids here in our community, I didn't have the cash register that tells you how much change to give. I cranked the handle. And so, and was able to give the change back.
Count
but
it
it's
back.
Because that's right. And my grandfather used to always say, again, he couldn't read or write. And he'd tell you, I can't read, write, or spell, but I could count my money very well.
Yeah.
And so, and that was a requirement that I had to be able to count. And so when I would give the change back to the patrons, which were ultimately our neighbors in the community, they were impressed by the fact that I can give the right amount of change. And you figure if you're 8 or 9 years old and you're in school doing what you're supposed to be doing with the guidance and the help that's out there for you to get, both from home and from school, then being able to give the right amount of change should be an expectation, not something that surprises people. But for me, the fact that I constantly heard them saying, oh, she's so smart, you can't cheat her, she's smart. And because of that, I didn't think I was as smart as they did, but I wanted to live up to that. And so I worked even harder to make sure, not only in math, but in other fields, that I was living up to that title of being smart. So really, in essence, I had people who believed in me and made me believe in myself. And that was part of the push to work harder. Again, my family knew that they didn't have an education, but they knew education was the equalizer. But again, before you even get to some of that, you got to address the hunger issues. Why do we have some communities that don't have food to feed their children? We've got to be able to deal with that. And so when we work together with United Way and with some of the other nonprofit organizations in our community, Boys and Girls Club, all of those coming together, Smart Start of Forsyth County,
right,
working with all of these to help our children get what they need, working with our school system and realizing that it's not just a school or teacher or principal problem. It's not just a parent problem. This is a community problem, and we've all got to work together to provide those wraparound services to the children in our community who not only need them, Sheriff, they deserve them.
I like that. So I got 3 questions because I know you're a busy woman. One is that what do we tell people that are looking for the leadership? What can they do? I know you said yard by yard, the yard is hard, inch by inch is a cinch.
Yes, sir.
I like that. But when we look at this picture and we know some of the issues that are out there that are happening in our community, what do we do going forward? And what are some of the lows of this job and the highs? What brings you back every day to the fight rather than walking away? What brings you back for another day rather than just saying, hey, I'm done? Because, we've had this conversation. This job changes you. It changes anyone because you see the best of mankind, but the worst of mankind. So the question becomes, how do you come back every day, your highs and your lows, and what do we tell the people going forward? What can they expect from you?
So to answer your question, what brings me back to work every day? When I'm at one of our local schools on Fridays and going to give a child a high five, and the children the child put his or her hand down and walk over to me and give me a hug. I'm going to give a high five. They're coming to give a hug. That's what gets me out of bed every day. And of course, being a mother, I think about my own children and knowing that I've been blessed enough to be able to provide the things for my children that they've needed to be successful in life, but realizing that's what most mothers want to be able to do for their children, and realizing that despite some of their hardest work and their best effort, some of them still can't. I believe it's my personal obligation, but I think it's the obligation of our community that each one lift one, and I believe that that's what we should be doing. I think if we can all work together to bring all of us up, it makes our community so much more healthier, and it sets our children up to be able to take our place. I certainly believe that there are many children out there who do desire to be police chief, to be the sheriff here. And some of them may not see it for themselves. But we know that it's possible, and I think it's up to us to be those people in their lives that I told you the neighbors in my community who patronized my grandfather's store was in the lives of me and my sisters, and that is believing in something in us that we don't even realize exists. And I think we should be showing that to our children every day. Like I said, you've taken a step with North Hills. I think we all need to reach out and figure out what is it we can do. And I hear a lot of people say, well, what can I do? You can go to a school and read to a child. It only takes about an hour. You can go to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and be a big. You can join the United Way and all the different efforts to support the backpack programs. You can always write a check, and to be quite honest with you, a check is easy to do. You're giving of your treasure. If you can give of your time where you could really see what's going on, I think it better puts you in a better position to be able to understand what it is you're passionate about and what you can do. But at the end of the day, we've got to be able to work together, because we're only as strong as a community as our weakest citizens.
I like that. At Off the Cuffs, one of the things that we talk about before I let you go is we talk about collaborations. We talk about partnerships, because we didn't just get here by ourselves. We got here together. We're affected by this directly and indirectly. One of the things that when I ride around through this city, through this county, through this country, one of the things that I find is that the divisiveness. And we've got to realize that together we are strong. Together we are strong. Each one of us are connected, whether we want to accept it or not. We are. We live in the same city. We live in the same county. We live in the same country. And so I feel that having you here, putting information out, letting people see the side of you that they don't see, because when they see you, they see Chief. They don't see Catrina. They don't see the young lady who is a mother, who has an autistic child. They don't see the woman who has a husband. They don't see you as a woman that came out of Detroit. Once again, they don't know your story. All they see is what they see. And so by giving them a chance to see you, I want them to also give this a chance to work. Give the partnerships in the community a chance to work with law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, we talked about systems, and you've heard me say this on many occasions, that there are many systems within our society, whether it's the educational system, whether it's the banking system, the economic system, the religion system. And at the end of the day, when those systems fail our children, the system of the criminal justice system is the catch-all system.
Right.
It is that thin line that separates those systems. It is that thin line that separates chaos from peace. It's that thin line that separates a lot of things in life. And sometimes I think we forget that if we strengthen all those systems, our education system, our access, in other words, if we have access, if children have access to food, the clothing, the shelter.
Right.
We talked about this on many occasions. We talked about Maslow's, the hierarchy of needs that people have to have. At the end of the day, they talked about the pyramid, the food, clothing, and shelter, and it moves up and it comes to this thing called self-actualization, where you can never self-actualize until your basic needs are met. And so we're missing some basic needs of our children. As our community, we've got to do some things differently. I applaud you for what you're doing. More importantly, the men and women of the Sheriff's Office applaud you because of the partnership, the willingness to help, the willingness to, because we're not two different, even though we're two different agencies, we still serve the people.
Right.
And and at the end of the day, no one is greater than the people. And so I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you took time to stop by Off the Cuffs, because Off the Cuffs, at the end of the day, our objective is to put information out there to give people a different look from what they've been looking. When we say off the cuffs, that means we're taking off the cuffs. We're giving you how we feel. It has so many meanings with off the cuffs, because what I realized, the situation that we have entered into our society is not one that we can arrest our way out of. You said that education is a great equalizer. I've often said that education is the great emancipator. So you've got to be able to compete in a society that is competitively driven. And by being able to compete, we've got to educate our kids. We've got to make sure that the footing is equal. We've got to make sure that policing with compassion. We've got to make sure that we treat everybody fairly, regardless of race, color, creed, or even party affiliation. We've got to remove the adjectives from it and do what is right, what is legal. And we've got to look at it and be honest about it, because so many times we look at a situation and we're affected by so many influences that our vision gets clouded. And so I want you, and I impress upon you to don't change. Stay Catrina Thompson from Detroit. Stay that strong superwoman. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep thriving. Keep building bridges, because at the end of the day, we got each other.
That's right.
And so I thank you for being here on Off the Cuffs. Stop by anytime, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow somewhere, I'm sure. Thank you for coming by. Anything you want to say?
No, Sheriff, I just want to remind the viewers and listeners that you mentioned policing with passion, and I'd like to say
Compassion.
Compassion. I'm sorry. We policing and leading with love, and I'd like to leave the listeners with this, and that is, when you see a law enforcement officer, be it a sheriff, a special agent with a federal agency, or local law enforcement in your local police department, you're seeing a person, particularly when you see the uniform, tell you without ever opening up your mouth, without ever opening up their mouth, that they love you. And people may ask, well, why do you say that? And I say that for this reason, and you know this better than I do, and that is that when we take on this job, we take an oath. And in that oath, we know that we are telling people we will give up our lives to save yours. And what greater love, right?
Is that?
We lead with love.
You've got to. You must have love, and you must have compassion for the people in which you serve. Because, at the end of the day, we're public servants. And so I thank the people of this county, of this city, that has given both of us the opportunity.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed serving the people of the United States as an agent. I think that, blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be called the children of God. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity. I look forward to seeing you again. And as I said, stop by anytime.
Yes, sir.
And I like to end on a good note. As you said, yard by yard is hard. Inch by inch,
anything's a cinch.
Anything's a cinch. So go out, find your inch, be a part of, get involved, and at the end of the day, we got each other. Thank you, and once again, join us at the table, Off the Cuffs.